This lecture is going to give you some advice on writing questionnaires, writing good questions and questionnaires when you're doing survey work. So I've outlined a process for creating a survey, and this process really starts with something we talked about during the first lecture. So the first lecture, we talked about the backward marketing research article. And in that article, I said that you want to begin with the end in mind. So you want to think about, what decisions are you trying to make? And then you want to think about what information do you need to make those decisions? And then part of the advice of that article was to start with the tables and the graphs and the appendix that's going to go in that marketing research report, and think about, here's the types of tables that I'm going to need to produce, or the types of graphs that I'm going to need to produce in order to answer my questions. Okay, so I think we called them scenario tables back during that discussion. Then once you figure out, okay, here are the pieces of information that I'm going to need to make my decision, writing a questionnaire becomes much easier then. So if you know you're going to need answers to questions X, Y, and Z, it's kind of obvious that you better put questions about X, Y, and Z on your survey. Okay, now if you don't go through this exercise of the backward marketing research process, figuring out what questions to put on the survey becomes really haphazard, and it really doesn't. You need to follow the structured approach. One thing that I always do when I'm working on a survey, or if I'm reviewing the survey of a student, is I'll go through the questions one by one, and I'll ask myself, or I'll ask the student, if you know the responses to this survey, this question, what are you going to do? So the results come back, and the mean of question 1 is 4. So what? Right. So if you don't have a good answer to that so what question, then you probably don't need that question on the survey. So you should be able to say, okay, I'm going to take this survey, this question, and I'm going to evaluate the mean for these different segments, and that's going to tell me which segment I should target, or it's going to help me figure out how I'm going to position this thing. Right? So you need a good answer to that. Go through that exercise of what are you going to do with the information from each question. Space on surveys is really precious. You just don't have time to mess around with unnecessary questions. So you got to get all the garbage out of a survey that's just kind of nice to know as opposed to essential to know. Next step, you need to pick an administration method. So what I mean by that, are you going to do an in-person interview? You're going to do a phone survey? You're going to do a mail survey? You're going to do an internet survey? And a lot of this depends on the nature of the information that you're gathering. So if it's something that where the person really needs to touch and feel something to give a reasonable rating, you may need to do in-depth interviews. That would rule out phone surveys or mail surveys. There are a lot of interesting things that can be done with virtual product experiences, and maybe you can use that, but you need to make that decision. If it's something that's a very personal, a lot of personal questions about sensitive issues, it may not be best to have an interviewer, but if you have an interviewer, you better have very well trained interviewers to do that. More of an anonymous administration method might be better in such a situation. Okay, next you're going to write the questions. You're going to order the sections in the questions. You'll format the survey, and then you'll pretest, then you'll pretest again, and you'll pretest again. So by pretesting, what I mean is you're going to get, ideally someone from the population itself, and get them to take that survey. So it's very easy to If you write a question, you'll read it the way you intended to write it instead of the way it is actually written. So if you get a fresh set of eyes to look at this, it really helps. And if it's from that population, they'll be able to help you understand if there are questions that are unclear, words that are unclear, words that are not understood by the target population. Finally, you want to go through this thing and make sure the survey is going to meet your objectives. Once a survey is dropped, you really can't modify it. It's not like qualitative research where a couple interviews in you can start asking different questions. When you drop a survey, you better have it right. So one other theme of this course, and it applies to this module as well, seek to understand relationships. So, your survey should be leading you to the point where you're going to be able to study how something that's under your control, positioning your brand, whatever it is, affects something you care about, purchase intent, right? So, if you're driving towards a relationship, then you'll have appropriate independent variables and dependent variables measured on your survey. At this point, I'm going to run you through some very commonly used questions, and then we'll go through some common mistakes that people often make when they're writing questionnaires. So these two types of scales, the semantic differential and the Likert scale, are really good. Use them. So semantic differential scale has scale anchors that are antonyms. So the typical client of Jacques hair care is young or old on a 7-point scale. Plain or sophisticated, thrifty, or a big spender. All right, so these are really good questions. Likert scales, on the other hand, are exactly like semantic differentials, but have different anchors. So the Likert scales usually are anchored by strongly agree to strongly disagree. So a few guidelines on this. You usually want to allow for a midpoint, which means having an odd number of questions. If you're going to have to explain the meaning of every response category, so remember CPK had these 5-point scales where 1 was poor, 2 was fair, 3 was good, 4 was very good, 5 was excellent. Okay, so if you have to explain the meaning of every response category, then you probably want fewer if you're doing a phone survey. It's just not really practical to have to go through 7 values or 9 values. So I'd recommend going with 5 and at the very, very, very minimum 3 if you're going to have to explain those values. Otherwise, if you can just get by with saying, we have a 5-point scale anchored by strongly agree, strongly disagree, then I'd opt for never going for 3. So if you have mail or internet or anything like that, you want to use 5 or 7. 11 is another one that's often used, and the 11s are often numbered 0 through 10, so you have 11 boxes. So it's absolutely essential that you have shades of gray. So and the more shades of gray that you have, to a point. So 5 is much better than 2. So dichotomous questions don't analyze that well. Much better if you have 5 points so you can capture some of these shades of gray. I don't really like it, but I like it a lot. That would be a 4. Make sure you anchor each end. These scales are very easily analyzed, so you want to use them. Very good questions. Let me show you a quick illustration of what you can do with this. Attributes versus their importance. So you could ask someone about their beliefs of lunch at McDonald's is, with the semantic differential scale, is it nutritious or not nutritious, convenient, expensive? So these are three different attributes of lunch at McDonald's. Then you can also ask the respondent the extent to which they're important. So now we're going to anchor the scale with very important through very not very important. If we were to ask this for a large sample of people, find the means for that segment, and we can plot them in a little graph like this. So we have importance versus the perceptions or the beliefs about McDonald's. Now, stuff up in the first quadrant is really important because it's important to the consumer, and these are your strengths. So you're doing stuff that's important to the consumer. Over in this segment, this second quadrant, these are things that you really need to work on, because in this target segment, nutrition is really important, but they don't think McDonald's is doing very well. So these are things that you want to work on. You'd want to introduce menu items. You might want to have other contact points that would attempt to move the beliefs about nutrition over to the first quadrant. The third quadrant you really don't care about. These are things you're not good at, and consumers don't find important. So McDonald's is not really very good at doing gourmet, but then that's not important to these consumers in this category. So don't bother becoming the gourmet restaurant if you're McDonald's. Items in the fourth quadrant, on the other hand, are things that you're doing pretty well. So McDonald's is perceived as low expense. It's not really that important to consumers. Well, you're maybe wasting your effort then. So very simple graph that goes over very well with in client projects, and you can make it very easily with a survey. Let's talk a little bit about rating versus ranking. So sometimes you'll see questions like this: please rank the following movies. So which of the three is your favorite, versus rating the movies on a 7-point scale in this case. A few comments on this. The rankings have the advantage that there will be a top choice. The problem with rankings is that you don't really know anything about the difference between the top choice and the second choice. The consumer might really like both the first and the second choice, or the consumer might be, they might really like the first one and not be that keen on the second one. Ranking will not tell you that. Third possibility, they may not like any of them, but if you force them to go with which one do you like the most, or in other words, which one do you dislike the least, ranking, you can't really tell that with just ranking. So for those reasons, I really prefer rating data. Another reason to prefer rating data is that it's very easy to analyze. So all of the techniques that you're going to be studying next quarter, so ranging from correlations to regression to factor analysis, thrive on rating data. You really need much more advanced statistical courses to do much with ranking data. So for these reasons, I don't use rankings very much at all. Stick towards rating on semantic differential or Likert scales.